So can you tell us about your first sortie, Bob?
Okay, well, we had, when we got to the squadron, of course, we were found that we were going to be doing this marking by dive bombing. We were, the first couple of weeks that we were on the squadron, that's all we did was every day we were out at the bombing range and practicing our dive bombing. And we were usually the fellows that when it started out with us, but as they got more confidence, they got around to what, a 45-degree angle, which they decided that, and most of the guys decided that was the best for them. And it gave an opportunity to, once you drop your TIs, that you would have the pullout would be, you'd lose another 500 feet or so. So you didn't want to get below 500 feet because you might run into a chimney or a radio mast or something like that. And so you tried to be up straight and level at 500 feet. Now, one of the Australian cruises was before we got to the squadron, but they came back after their trip, and they had two bricks embedded in their starboard wingtip. That's how close we came to running into a chimney, and it was so that one of the pilots at that point was he was an ex-bricklayer, so they were going to build in the officers' mess. They were going to build a triangular fireplace, and these two bricks held an honored position. That was how close they came to buying it. But at any rate, you kept practicing until you got your average error down below 50 yards. That was, you had to be done before they let you mark. And so the first couple of weeks you didn't do anything other than just practice your dive bombing. And of course, then so your first, and it just happened that they were doing, at the end of the war there, they were doing a lot of mine laying and stuff like that in the waterways to stop traffic. Europe was full of rivers that were navigable and canals and things like that. And of course, the Mosquito was ideal for dropping mines in very tight things. Like a canal would only be maybe 50, 100 feet wide or something like that. So you had to be right down at about 300 feet. And so at any rate, that was our first trip. And we went out over the North Sea and across the coast just near the mouth of the Elbe River, and then we zigzagged around to throw the Germans off to where we were going, and we found the river, and we turned up the river, and there was an island that we knew there, and so when we crossed over the island, we just did a timed ring to run. Well, I think our time was across the island in 15 seconds. We dropped our first mine, and next about 30 seconds and dropped the second mine. But when we were going out, we were told to do go at 1,500 feet to be down low enough that the radar wouldn't pick us up too easily. And so when we were getting to where we were still out over the North Sea, and at the end of the Frisian Islands, which was our turning point, we turned around there and crossed the coast at 1,500 feet. Well, nobody had, well, when we first arrived at the squadron, we were assigned to B flight, and our flight commander was Squadron Leader Oakley, and he had our file up in front of him, and he was looking at that. He said, "I see that neither of you fellows have had any operational experience." My skipper, of course, had been, when he got overseas, he got dinged as an instructor, and he did 2 years of instructing up in northern Scotland, and so he had lots of hours, but none operational. And of course, I just come straight through the training command, so I didn't have any operational experience. So he said, "Well," he said, "you find this, you may, when you go to your first briefing," he said, "and you're told what you're going to have to do and how you go about it," he said, "you may feel a little sick." I said, "But," he said, "don't worry," he said, "look around the room," he said, "and old-timers look as sick as you feel." So at any rate, away we went, and we crossed the coast when we were crossing we were spaced about two minutes apart or something, so that we wouldn't run into one another when we were down on the river. And so we could see, when we turned in towards the coast, we'd see all this light flag coming up, and as each plane crossed the coast. And so we were tail end, we were junior crew, so we were tail end. So by the time we got there, the German gunners were well prepared, and so we were stooling across at 1,500 feet, which was just a perfect height for a light flak, 20 millimeter flak. And we got to the end. God, we were looking down and started to see this tracers coming, and it just looked like a carpet of stars down there. But as they got closer, they became faster and faster. It's like they were all around you, and and suddenly you realize that for every one that you could see, there was 4 or 5 in there that you couldn't see. And how in the devil you could go through all of that light flak and never get hit is just absolutely amazing. And so, at any rate, we got through it all right, and we did some zigzagging around, found the river anyway, and found our place and dropped our mines. And but we didn't know that 2 weeks earlier than that, they'd had another, I guess just about the time we arrived at the squadron, they had done a similar trip to the same area on the Elm River, down about halfway from the coast to Hamburg, And we had, when we were getting ready to go, they had, the armorers had brought the mines out and put 2 mines, and they carried them on little dollies, and they had them sitting right under the mosquito with the laundry doors open, and a Navy little truck drove up, and a couple of petty officers got out, and each had a couple of suitcases, and they shooed us all away from the planes, and they went over there and they fused the mines. What we didn't know, and of course the German didn't know either, is that the mines that they had used previously were entirely different than the fuses that we were using that night. And so when the Germans, on the first go around, they came out with their minesweepers and very gingerly swept the river and exploded all the mines. So when we came over 2 weeks later and dropped our mines, they figured the next morning they came out with their minesweepers and blew up 3 minesweepers. Because they changed the fuse. So that was, but at any rate, it was, I guess we did everything that probably just not knowing any better. Going in at 1,500 feet was a mistake. Why they sent us that way, I don't know. But when we came, we managed to get back and said, you know, what did you guys do? I think we had 12 aircraft out that night. And some of them said we were in at 10,000 feet, and others said 5,000 feet. Others said they went in at 300 feet. And but nobody told us that we were stooging along at 1,500 feet. But luck, beginner's luck, I guess. And so that was, and our second trip, of course, was to Bremerhaven in the harbor, Bremerhaven, and that went very smoothly. We sure as hell didn't go in at 1,500 feet. We were down there with the guys that were going in at 300 feet.
Why was that safer?
Well, you're just coming so fast that, we had...
So the gunners can't track you then?
No.
And what about fighters, night fighters? They...
Oh, no, they couldn't catch you.
Because, yeah. So what what armament would have been, like for guns, would you have carried, and the mines, you talked a little before about, did they have parachutes on them?
Yes, a small parachute, and actually it was at the end of the war, the Air Force actually sank more German shipping with their aerial mines than the Royal Navy did with their regular mines.
What was the difference between the aerial mines and the regular mines?
Well, the ones at the Navy were usually fixed. They would drop and they were attached to a big wire, and they knew about how deep the water was going to be, so they would adjust that thing so that the thing was down there just under the surface, maybe 5 feet under the surface or something. And they were kind of they were round, and they had sort of horns sticking out all of them. And if the boat hit that horn, it would trigger the explosion. Whereas the aerial lines that we dropped were just like a water tank, actually. You know, they were about this big around, and maybe probably 10 feet long, and they had a small parachute at one end. As soon as it dropped out, the pin dropped out, the parachute would come out. This would slow the mine down enough to, when it hit the water, it wasn't going to go so fast that it would explode. And it would just sink to the bottom and lay there.
And what triggered it?
Some magnetism and acoustics, or that was, we never did know what these fuses were, but they were using different fuses to confuse the enemy.
So Bob, do you remember, like, so when you're physically in the aircraft and you're coming over onto the enemy coast, like, where are you standing, and could you describe like where you stand or where you sit, and then what positions you take, like when you actually drop the mines, and could you describe that?
Yes, it was, actually the dropping the mines was, well, usually it was a timed run or something like that. They'd say, now you, like on the Elbe River, there was this island that across, and it was just a low-lying island, wasn't occupied or anything like that. And you just started to count. You just watching, you're looking at you watch. 15 seconds, you drop. The pilot just push the button and drop one mine. You'd wait for 30 seconds to drop the second. But you'd be in the Mosquito, of course. You're just the two of you, and you're pretty tight quarters. You know, your cockpit wasn't any more than that wide, so that you really. Once if I had to go down into the bomb hatch for say when we were doing wind finding or something like that, I'd be sort of rubbing, this shoulder would be rubbing the side of the cockpit, and my other shoulder would be rubbing against hutch, and so that was, and he was a little bit ahead of me. He was about, I guess there's about 15 inches there, and that was where my radar was. My G was down here at the bottom.
Behind his seat? Would it be behind his seat, Bob? Did you say?
Behind Hutch's seat.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was about 15 inches ahead of me, but that worked out quite well, because it was when it was gee, what was I going to say? Oh, that made it handy for me. All of the fuel cocks were under the pilot's seat, and so it was, if he had to change tanks or something like that, he would have to, and he might have to undo his Sutton harness, because he'd have to lean way over and reach under his seat and change. So we worked out a system, and I suppose other crews probably had similar systems, but I could just look under his seat, and I could see all the various fuel cocks, because we had two droppable tanks, 50-gallon, one on each wing, and then we had, I think, four different tanks, gasoline tanks in the fuselage and in the wings. And so Hutch would just tell me what tanks he wanted to be on, and I could just reach down with it and turn them. I didn't have to remove anything, and I could see what I was doing. He couldn't, he had to, he was trying to do it, he'd have to do it just by feel. So but that apparently is how Guy Gibson and his navigator were killed, because Gibson, with having done 100 and some odd trips in various aircraft, had never, he only had, I think, 2.5 hours time on a Mosquito, and his navigator didn't have any time at all. And so they figured that what he didn't know how, and because either the navigator couldn't figure out what to do, or something. Anyway, they figured they just ran out of gas, and that was it. They still had plenty of gas to get home, but I guess they didn't understand how to change tanks.
So in your duties, like when you're flying, say, on that mission, how are you navigating that? Are you using G at all, or are you
Yes,
using...
as soon as you took off, you started to use your G to find winds. Even on your climb out, if like say if you're going out on this thing, we would probably go, if it was a gardening trip, you'd probably go up to about 1,000 feet, level out, and then you'd start taking G fixes, and it would, what you did, it was you'd find what they called 6-minute winds. You would take a G fix there, and then you'd watch your, and 3 minutes later, you take another fix. 3 minutes later, you take another fix. That was 6 minutes. That's a tenth of an hour. 6 minutes, 60 minutes. So, and you measure that distance on your chart, and if it was, say, 35 nautical miles, you knew that you were doing 350 miles an hour, or nautical miles an hour. So that was, yeah, it was an easy way, and you, what they call it, DR ahead 6 minutes, and so then you had, and as soon as you had checked that, and what you hoped that all your 3 fixes would be in a straight line, but sometimes it'd be a little difficult, so you'd adjust your line, and then you'd start doing another 6-minute wind, and then another and another until you ran out of G range, and depended on how good you were at reading your G. Was you could, as you got farther away from the thing, you had these lines on your cathode ray tube would start to interference would start coming in, and they'd say, well, it was grass, and it would start to build up until, and the
Can I just cover, so that interference showing up on the screen, you guys call that grass because it
was green.
Green, oh, when it started to grow up like grass.
Yeah, yeah. And when your signal came along like that, it'd be a blip so high, and just at the end of the blip, it was a little white dot, right at the end of the thing. And so as the grass grew, the farther away you got, finally you get up there. And if you're a good operator, sometimes the grass would go up above a little, but you could, if you look very carefully, you can see the little white dot there. And so that gave you another 50 or 75 miles that you could still get fixes.
So you, if I can let's just clarify this. So you have your screen that you're looking at. You have your little table that you're plotting on it, and then you're constantly are you constantly talking with the pilot?
Oh yeah, you're probably. Well, you didn't while you were doing that. You really, unless something came up that you weren't very sure of or something, you talk back and forth or something, but it was, you were so busy on the way out that you were taking those things just as fast as you could, 3 minutes you'd think, but it went on, that 3 minutes went off too fast.
Yeah.
And,
Are you usually with the flight
you were sitting here and you had your folding table that came up here, just and there was if you it folded when you didn't want or didn't use it, you just it folded up and sat down on the side of your right hand side, your right hand arm or foot. And so your G set was right here. You just you didn't even have to really move. You just put it in on the tube, and you had 4 lines there, and you had to get all 4 lines lined up. And so you had to be twiddling, so you had to be kind of ambidextrous. And once some guys were good at it, others were mediocre at it, and some guys couldn't handle it at all.
So after you drop your mines, then what does your role become then? Do you
just get home as quick as possible.
And did you bother using G then, or are you just dead reckoning?
Usually you were beyond G range then, and so you just dead reckoning actually till you got back closer to home, and then you started to be able to pick up the G.
And then when you're coming home, did you have anything specific on the aircraft that home base knows it's you and it's not an intruder?
Yes, there was a thing that you had, it's called IFF, which was Identification Friend or Foe. And if you want, you turn on your IFF, and it was, of course, you didn't want to use it all the time. It was something like H2S. It was sending out a signal which the German radar could pick up. But it would show up on the friendly, if it was when you turned it on, your friendly radar, it would flash. It would be on the screen, and so your guys in England knew that you were a friendly aircraft. If it was just a steady blip, then they knew that it was an enemy aircraft.
So to go back a bit, Bob, you'd said that your first, there was kind of a tradition about some of the names, like when you're going for supper or the Last Supper or something like. Could you talk about before the mission and some of the traditions that they had then about breakfasts
Yeah,
and?
usually you had, in the morning, if there was going to be a raid that night, and if you were, like, you alternated, this is the way we operated, was that A flight would be on the battle order one day, and the next day B flight would be on the battle order. So you would go and look on the board and see, and it would say B flight, and they'd list the pilot's name, and so that you knew that you were going to be operating that night. So you would then usually, if most of the time the other flight, like if B flight was going to be going out that night, A flight would do the night flying tests, and they would take the aircraft up and just fly around and check the radar, making everything, that your G sets are working properly, and your LORAN sets, and the pilots checking the engines and stuff like that. So that, the B flight guys would be, they would usually, if it was a marking trip or something, they would mock up what it looked like, or if maybe just put aerial photographs down, and you'd study them to see any strange markings on the ground, and to help you pick out the aiming point. You see, on a small target, it was important that your aiming point was away from the actual target, maybe by 200 or 300 yards, so that if you were going after a small oil refinery or something like that, that if you had the aiming point right on the top of the target, the first few bombs that came down would obliterate your TIs, and so you'd have sort of an offset. Your aiming point might be out here, and the target's over here. So, but in the briefing, when the heavy navigators said, if you're, or the bomb aimers especially, they'd say, well, you know, your aiming point is going to be over here, but this is your correction you put on your bomb sight so that your bombs are not over here. And that, so the TIs that keep burning here while the bombs are falling over here.
So could you describe when you fly one, when you're marking, you talked about like there's a wind type of mission that you do, but there's a target marking?
Yeah.
Can you talk about the target marking one?
Well, a typical raid for us would be, we would send out six marker aircraft, each one with 2 TIs. That would be, so you'd have 12 TIs available to put down on the ground. Now then, they find the heavies, you see, they would be coming in at 20,000 feet or so, and they might be not really their last winds before they got to the target might be 100 miles, maybe even 125 miles. Because you see, the best thing towards the end of the war there, we were going, down south and east of Berlin and some east of Berlin. And it was, G was, the Germans would be trying their best to jam the G and get the grass up there high enough that you couldn't use it anymore. And so it was, this was, and they had let's see. So I guess that they would, they would have the wind finding. Then you had 4 mosquitoes that were listed as wind finders, and they would come and they would stay up high with the main force at the same height as the main force, and they'd be given a designation, say that the target was here, out here, about 25 miles on all around the target. There'd be, and he would give you a set of coordinates, and that was what you were to fly to. And once you got to there, you just opened your bomb base and dropped the pyrotechnic, which when it hit the ground emitted a flashing light. And so as soon as you dropped
So,
it.
Bob, is it an electronic type of thing then that's making a flashing light? Or is it something that's burning that makes it flashing? Do you know?
No, it was something that, it was a flashing light. I never, we were never allowed to go to the bomb dump and see what these things were, but it would do for about, it would flash for about 15 minutes. And so as soon as you dropped it, you do a fast 360 turn. And by the time you got around it, and I would then be down in the bomb hatch and have the bomb thing set, the bomb site set up, and we had a little, about like a cigar box, it was a little computer that was plugged into the gyroscopic bomb site, and when you came around, and by the time the thing would be flashing, and you left, right, and come up the thing, when you had it in the crosshairs of the bomb site, you click it twice, once to stop it and once to start it again. And then you do about a 5-minute orbit, a little slower this time. Come around again and come up to it and do the same thing, start and stop. And you do a second round. And now you had on your little computer, you had 2 sets of numbers. Your first number was your azimuth, and you had a little sheet of paper which is about, it was a little bigger than an ordinary sheet of paper, but it was like a big bullseye, and it started in the center at 0, and then concentric rings around there at 10 nautical mile intervals, and from the center starting at 0 out to about 10. And so that was, you looked at the first number, and that would give you, say, it might read 090. That meant that you were out here And of course, like your compass rose or whatever, outside. So you'd go, you do 090, and whatever the second number was, whether it be 6, you'd go count out 6 rings, and that gave you your wind direction and wind speed. And you did this, and you did a second, and so you had 2 winds. And you'd radio that to the wind leader, and he'd be one of the senior navigators on the.
Would he be with the heavy bomber stream?
No, he'd be with he'd be the what they call the wind leader.
The wind, okay.
And he would be the senior navigator on the rate. And he would average those 8 winds. The other guys had his own 2, and the other 3 would radio to him. He'd average those out, and he'd pass it on to the master bomber, and he would then alert the main force, and that's what they'd use to bomb on. They'd set up their bomb site with that as a wind. They wouldn't use their own winds, because that might be, they may have gone through a front or something like that, and so the wind direction may have changed in that last 100 miles.
So that was the question. How far, is there a time frame or a distance that you're from the main bomber stream? This group would
Yeah,
be.
you'd be finding your winds probably. Well, it took you to find your 2 winds. It took you about 15 minutes. Your first orbit was about 3 minutes, and a 5-minute orbit, another 5-minute orbit. By the time we got to figure it, it was very quick. You just you had 2 sheets of paper, and you radio it to the wind leader, and he'd pass it on. So you had to be there about probably 20 minutes ahead of and you're far enough apart that the German radar couldn't sort of figure out what you were doing. Whether they knew what you were doing or not, I don't know.
And then after, would you head home immediately, or would
Yeah.
you stay around?
Yeah.
You'd head home.
Yeah. And make damn sure that you didn't fly through the main bomber stream, which we did on our first one. It scared the daylights out of us.
So did you fly back underneath them when they're bombing, or did you fly back through the stream then?
We usually climbed up about 5,000 feet above them.
So on your first trip out, though, what did you do when you were returning? That you made a mistake?
Well, we just turned when we were finished, and it just happened that our position was just directly. We were going to go right through the bomber stream. We see, right? Big black shape would go past, and they'd hit the slipstream, bang, and bang.
So you can actually see these shapes go by.
Oh yeah.
Could you describe then the third, like you've described the gardening, you've described the wind marking, and then could you describe then when you're doing a target marking?
Yeah.
Then?
Yeah. Well, then of course on target marking, you usually to catch a good wind, and you'd take off and time yourself, because for marking you wanted to be you knew your TIs were only going to burn somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes, So by the time you would try to be at the target, say, 10 minutes ahead of the heavies, and you'd be circling around, and about well, I guess you'd have to be about 15 minutes, I guess, to you'd be over the target circling, and the about 10 minutes the aerial flares would light up. By the time you got somebody picked out the thing, and you'd dive down one at a time. So as soon as the first, and it would usually be one of the senior pilots that checked, or at least the senior crew would be the first to identify the aiming point. And as soon as he did that, he would call out, "I have the aiming point, tally ho." And everybody knew then, keep circling. Well, he'd identify himself. He'd be say marker 1 or marker 2, but it was anybody. It could be marker 6, but it's not. Marker 6 was usually the junior crew, so it was one of the more experienced guys that usually were able to call out the first. And after that, then as soon as they saw his TI go down, then somebody else would call out his number, whether it be 5 or 6 or 4 or 3, and just so they knew that, and when all 6 of them had dropped their TIs, then everybody took off. Number who.
So your role in that, are you in the bomb, are you in the nose at that stage, or is the pilot?
Just when you're diving, my job was to watch the altimeter very, very closely. And when you started your dive, you call it out in 4,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 2,000. And then you start calling it out by hundreds. And when you got getting close to the 1,000 mark, you'd be watching it very closely. You get to 1,000 feet, and the pilot didn't look like he was ready to. He'd start pounding on his back and say, "Drop that bloody thing." And so you pull out, and away you go.
So just to confirm, Bob, then, so are you carrying 2 like marker device bombs?
Mm-hmm.
Then you would go back. You do that twice then.
Well, no, it was usually after the first guy that went down. He'd drop one, and he would assess it, and he'd say, "Okay, that's good," or he said, "I've made a mistake." He'd call on the second guy to, so it was, and then everybody would adjust their.
So would you fly home with one marker bomb with you sometimes?
No, usually the later guys were they would, and if I think if by chance I think the leader he had 2 colors. He'd have, say, red and green. The other guys would all have maybe green. So if the first one went down and wasn't accurate, then they they would then they would drop the other TI to try and put it down right on top of the first one, and that would wash the color out. And it was then they'd go ahead and use the proper color.
Okay. So you can describe what that is? So it's a smaller bomb, and in there is what would they have to make that color? Do you think, like you said?
Well, they'd be the same, exactly the same size. The TIs were at the end of the war we were using 1,000 pounders, and so if he didn't get it right down on top of the thing, at least there'd be two TIs, one red and one green. So at least now they knew which one to go for.
Mm-hmm.
And they would just, you just make one pass and drop both your TIs at once.
And you did how many missions, Bob?
6.
And what was the breakdown of those missions?
Was I think 3 wind finders and 1 marking.
Okay.
Our last trip was to Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. That was our marking trip.
Did you ever see anyone shot down, or did you see any other planes ever shot down?
No.
Could you describe about being chased by either night fighters or RCAF?
Yeah, we chased one night. They had, the Germans were sort of desperate towards the end of the war there, and they were trying all sorts of different combinations. And there was one, I think it was a Heinkel 119, I think. And it was a twin engine night fighter with twin tails, they then put mounted a V1 jet on the top of the fuselage, so that since it had twin tails, when they turned the V1 jet on, it wouldn't hit the tailplane. And so they would just, when they were, if they were being vectored on, at least what happened that night that we got chased was it was on the way home. So after on the way home, there wasn't really much until we got into G range. I didn't have any particular job to do, so I was just turn around on my and keep looking back at the thing. And we also had another situation which we called Monica. And it was if you turned it on, it gave a little cone at the back, radar. And if there was a night fighter chasing you, it would show up on your screen, and so you do some. Circles, or just to try and break away from. As it turned out, with the mosquito, that rarely happened because you could just open the throttles and run away from them. But at any rate, with this thing, having that. It was fairly fast with the 2 engines, and it could just about catch a mosquito. And with when they turned on their V1, it could pick up about 50 miles an hour extra, and it could catch you. So I forget just exactly, but he was coming around behind us, and he turned on his jet, and the V1 jet left a big streak of flame up the back for about 15 feet. It's pretty bright. And when I saw this, I told Hutch, I said, I think we're being chased by this thing. And he said, well, keep an eye on it and let me know when he's about in gun range. And so I was watching, and I said, I think he's out there right now. And so we just did a quick 360, and he was trying to turn to follow us, but with that jet, he couldn't turn nearly as fast as we could. So he disappeared in the night, and we never saw him again.
Is there any other experiences that you can think of, like on any of those missions that you recall that stand out?
No,
or
there was,
interesting?
other than that first trip where we ran into the bomber stream, after that we sure as hell didn't make that mistake again. And those two follow-up wind-finding trips were very uneventful. Maybe it was a lot of pilots or navigators, of course, were on their second tours, and they had got to Pathfinders mainly because of their first tour, and having been better than average, they were taken on and for a second tour to be. And they didn't have any bombing experience, but I did, and I think one of the other Canadians had a bombing experience. So we were probably more familiar with making those orbits on time and accurately. Because you have, when you're coming up on the thing, you had to leave your bomb site. And of course, we had the Mark 14 bomb site, which was just as good as the Norton bomb site. Probably better in some ways.
Do you recall? Do you ever see the other 6 aircraft or 5 aircraft that are flying with you when you're on these missions? You said you're sometimes flying 6. Do you actually see them?
Well, I don't think we ever. I can't remember, but I did hear of one, and these were mosquitoes, and the navigator had gone down into the bomb hatch to check the bomb site, and he saw some movement, and he leaned ahead and looked straight down, and he was looking into the cockpit of another mosquito, about 25 feet away. And he told his pilot, start climbing slowly. But he never did find out. They tried, figure out time, but they never did find out which 2 aircraft it was.
But usually, you said before you were about 2 minutes apart in timing over. That was for the mine lane,
Yeah,
I
it
guess.
was the mine lane. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
That was just so that because you're coming into pretty close contact. we almost ran, that was something else on that first trip where we were, and as we were flying up the river, as the river got narrower, they started firing at us from both sides, and we were getting pretty close, and so we decided we went down lower, down to about 100 feet above the water, and they had to bring their trajectories down, and then they started hitting one another on either side of the bank, so they quit shooting at us. And there was a night fighter that was doing a little shooting. One of our own intruders was there at the time, and he was shooting at these guns along the coast, or along the shore of the river. And
Was that a mosquito too, Bob? Or
yeah.
The intruder? Okay.
Yeah. And I just had just a fleeting glance. I happened to look up, and here's it was almost a full moon that night. And here on the thing there's a silhouette of a mosquito. Just if I hadn't looked up at that, just perfect silhouette of a mosquito. And